The Sword and the Stone, Chapter 20. It was haymaking again, and Merlin had been with them a year. The wind had visited them, and the snow, and the rain, and the sun once more. The boys looked longer in the leg, but otherwise everything was the same. 6 other years passed by. Sometimes Sir Grummer came on a visit. Sometimes King Pellinore could be descried galloping over the Perilous after the beast, or with the beast after him if they happened to have got muddled up. Coley lost the vertical stripes of his first year's plumage, and became grayer, grimmer, madder, and distinguished by smart horizontal bars where the long stripes had been. The Merlins were released every winter, and new ones caught again next year. Hobbs' hair went white. The sergeant-at-arms developed a pot-belly, and nearly died of shame, but continued to cry out 1-2 in a huskier voice on every possible occasion. Nobody else seemed to change at all, except the boys. These grew longer. They ran like wild colts as before, and went to see Robin when they had a mind to, and had innumerable adventures too lengthy to be recorded. Merlin's extra tuition went on just the same, for in those days even the grown-up people were so childish that they saw nothing uninteresting in being turned into owls. The wart was changed into countless different animals. The only difference was that now, in their fencing lessons, Kay and his companion were an easy match for the pot-bellied sergeant, and paid him back accidentally for many of the buffets which he had once given them. They had more and more proper weapons as presents when they had reached their teens, until in the end they had full suits of armor and bows nearly 6 feet long, which would shoot the cloth-yard shaft. You were not supposed to use a bow longer than your own height, for it was considered that by doing so you were expending unnecessary energy, rather like using an elephant gun to shoot an Ovis almond with. At any rate, modest men were careful not to overbow themselves. It was a form of boasting. As the years went by, Kay became more difficult. He always used a bow too big for him, and did not shoot very accurately with it either. He lost his temper, and challenged nearly everybody to have a fight, and in those few cases where he did actually have the fight, he was invariably beaten. Also, he became sarcastic. He made the sergeant miserable by nagging about his stomach, and went on at the wart about his father and mother when Sir Ector was not about. He did not seem to want to do this. It was as if he disliked it, but could not help it. The wart continued to be stupid, fond of Kay, and interested in birds. Merlin looked younger every year, which was only natural, because he was. Archimedes was married, and brought up several handsome families of quilly youngsters in the tower room. Sir Ector got sciatica. 3 trees were struck by lightning. Master Twitey came every Christmas without altering a hair. Master Paslew remembered a new verse about King Cole. The years passed regularly, and the old English snow lay as it was expected to lie, sometimes with a robin redbreast in one corner of the picture, a church bell or lighted window in the other. And in the end, it was nearly time for Kay's initiation as a full-blown knight. Proportionately, as the day became nearer, the 2 boys drifted apart, for Kay did not care to associate with the wart any longer on the same terms, because he would need to be more dignified as a knight, and could not afford to have his squire on intimate terms with him. The wart, who would have to be the squire, followed him about disconsolately as long as he was allowed to do so, and then went off full miserably to amuse himself alone, as best he might. He went to the kitchen. "Well, I am a Cinderella now," he said to himself. "Even if I have had the best of it for some mysterious reason, up to the present time, in our education, now I must pay for my past pleasures, and for seeing all those delightful dragons, witches, fishes, camel-leopards, pismires, wild geese, and such like, by being a second-rate squire, and holding Kay's extra spears for him, while he hoves by some well or other, and jousts with all comers. Never mind, I've had a good time while it lasted, and it is not such bad fun being a Cinderella, when you can do it in a kitchen which has a fireplace big enough to roast an ox." And the wart looked round the busy kitchen, which was colored by the flames till it looked like hell, with sorrowful affection. The education of any civilized gentleman in those days used to go through 3 stages, page, squire, knight, and at any rate the wart had been through the first 2 of these. It was rather like being the son of a modern gentleman who has made his money out of trade, for your father started you on the bottom rung even then in your education of manners. As a page, Wart had learned to lay the tables with 3 cloths and a carpet, and to bring meat from the kitchen, and to serve Sir Ector or his guests on bended knee, with 1 clean towel over his shoulder, 1 for each visitor, and 1 to wipe the basins. He had been taught all the noble arts of servility, and from the earliest time that he could remember, there had lain pleasantly in the end of his nose the various scents of mint, used to freshen the water in the ewers, or of basil, chamomile, fennel, hyssop, and lavender, which he had been taught to strew on the rushy floors, or of the angelica, saffron, aniseed, and tarragon, which were used to spice the savories which he had to carry. So he was accustomed to the kitchen, quite apart from the fact that everybody who lived in the castle was a friend of his, who might be visited on any occasion. Wart sat in the enormous firelight and looked about him with pleasure. He looked upon the long spits, which he had often turned when he was smaller, sitting behind an old straw target soaked in water, so that he would not be roasted himself, and upon the ladles and spoons, whose handles could be measured in yards, with which he had been accustomed to baste the meat. He watched with water in his mouth the arrangements for the evening meal: a boar's head with a lemon in its jaws, and split almond whiskers, which would be served with a fanfare of trumpets; a kind of pork pie with sour apple juice, peppered custard, and several birds' legs, or spiced leaves sticking out of the top to show what was in it; and a most luscious-looking frumenty. He said to himself with a sigh, "It is not so bad being a servant after all." "Still sighing?" asked Merlin, who had turned up from somewhere. "As you were that day when we went to watch King Pellinore's joust?" "Oh, no," said the wart. "Or rather, oh yes, and for the same reason. But I don't really mind. I am sure I shall make a better squire than old Kay would. Look at the saffron going into that frumenty. It just matches the firelight on the hams in the chimney." "It is lovely," said the magician. "Only fools want to be great." "Kay won't tell me," said the wart, "what happens when you are made a knight. He says it is too sacred. What does happen?" "Only a lot of fuss. You will have to undress him and put him into a bath hung with rich hangings, and then 2 experienced knights will turn up. Probably Sir Ector will get hold of old Grummer and King Pellinore, and they will both sit on the edge of the bath and give him a long lecture about the ideals of chivalry such as they were. When they have done, they will pour some of the bath water over him and sign him with the cross, and then you will have to conduct him into a clean bed to get dry. Then you dress him up as a hermit and take him off to the chapel, and there he stays awake all night, watching his armor and saying prayers. People say it is lonely and terrible for him in this vigil, but it is not at all lonely, really, because the vicar and the man who sees to the candles and an armed guard, and probably you as well, as his esquire, will have to sit up with him at the same time. In the morning you lead him off to bed to have a good sleep. As soon as he has confessed and heard mass and offered a candle with a piece of money stuck into it as near the lighted end as possible. And then, when all are rested, you dress him up again in his very best clothes for dinner. Before dinner you lead him into the hall, with his spurs and sword all ready, and King Pellinore puts on the first spur, and Sir Grummer puts on the second, and then Sir Ector girds on the sword, and kisses him, and smacks him on the shoulder, and says, 'Be thou a good knight.'" "Is that all?" "No. You go to the chapel again then, and Kay offers his sword to the vicar, and the vicar gives it back to him, and after that our good cook over there meets him at the door, and claims his spurs as a reward, and says, 'I shall keep these spurs for you, and if at any time you don't behave as a true knight should, why, I shall pop them in the soup.'" "That is the end?" "Yes, except for the dinner." "If I were to be made a knight," said the wart, staring dreamily into the fire, "I should insist on doing my vigil by myself, as Hob does with his hawks, and I should pray to God to let me encounter all the evil in the world in my own person, so that if I conquered there would be no more left, and if I were defeated, I would be the one to suffer for it." "That would be extremely presumptuous of you," said Merlin, "and you would be conquered, and you would suffer for it." "I shouldn't mind." "Wouldn't you? Wait till it happens and see." "Why do people not think, when they are grown up, as I do when I am young?" "Oh dear," said Merlin, "you're making me feel confused. Suppose you wait till you are grown up and know the reason." "I don't think that is an answer at all," replied the wart, justly. Merlin wrung his hands. "Well, anyway," he said, "suppose they did not let you stand against all the evil in the world." "I could ask," said the wart. "You could ask," repeated Merlin. He thrust the end of his beard into his mouth, stared tragically at the fire, and began to munch it fiercely.